12 states buying them. So says a major 5-year survey of conventional arms sales by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute.
In the last 5 years, India has gone on the biggest weapons shopping spree in the world, accounting for 14% of global arms purchases and importing nearly 3 times as many weapons as its nearest competitors, China and Pakistan. Because arms sales fluctuate year to year, the Stockholm-based think tank behind the report calculates 5-year averages. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates came in 4th and 5th place as the world's biggest buyers of arms, making up 42% of imports into the Middle East. Arms imports by African states have risen by 53% in the last 10 years, the 3 largest importers being Algeria, Morocco and Sudan. The United States and Russia dominate arms exports, accounting for over half the market. China has replaced France as the world's 4th largest arms exporter, pushing France into 5th place. The United Kingdom emerged as the largest arms buyer in Europe, but sales into Europe have decreased by 25% in the last 10 years, making it the only region in the world to see a sharp decline in arms imports.
And Siemon Wezeman, one of the authors of that report, is with the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Thank you for joining us from the Swedish capital. Let me ask you, before we go into specifics of the report, here's a question for you. Do more weapons sales mean the world is a safer or a more dangerous place?
I considering that most of the weapons go to places where there is tension, conflict going on, where countries don't trust each other, that it's becoming a less safer place.
And the uptick that we've seen, 14% over the past 5 years, you look at this on a global scale in these 5-year increments. How do you explain the fact that there is this volatility now?
Well, there is. If you look at the places where most of the imports take place and where the increases take place, it's exactly those places where there are tensions between countries, sometimes actually conflicts between countries. India and Pakistan, for example, while not fighting each other, are still technically at war. There is a ceasefire, but that's all. China and India have problems on their border. China has problems with different other neighboring countries in the maritime sphere. The Gulf states, the Middle East, is basically a hotbed of tension between countries. African countries have many internal problems and conflicts, as well as a number of outstanding tensions with neighboring countries. So it's not surprising that those countries are reacting to what the neighbor is doing, or what they think the neighbor is doing, or what they think the neighbor is planning by acquiring weapons. On top of that, Asian countries especially Asian countries have growing economies, so be it in the Middle East. Oil income is also increasing, so they can also afford it.
All right, so there's several factors at play here. In particular, though, we see at the top of your list there that buying binge between that triangle, India, Pakistan, and China. What kind of weapons are they buying?
What we are looking is major weapons, but a lot of the weapons that they are buying in recent years are quite advanced systems, quite often also weapons that have a long range, so not really what you would say purely for potential defensive use over their own territory, on their own border, but capable of reaching quite deep into a potential enemy's territory. Combat aircraft, long-range missiles that come with them, large warships, those kinds of systems. So that increases the sort of worry that countries are acquiring weapons, not necessarily purely for defensive purposes, but even also for offensive intervention type of purposes. That some of these countries have actually also openly said that in time of crisis, they are not going to wait and sit till the enemy is coming, but they will take on the enemy somewhere else, abroad.
Does that make the fact that the number of countries buying weapons has increased, but also the number of countries, as we saw in the report, producing weapons, it makes it, I suppose, harder worldwide to come to agreements whereby you limit arms races?
It's extremely very hard to limit arms trade. As you know, last year countries agreed on an arms trade treaty, which still has to be ratified. But if you look at that treaty, it doesn't limit the arms trade. It only regulates it a little bit better so that illegal trade is better controlled. But when you talk about limiting arms trade, limiting arms acquisitions, there are many countries who will say, what's wrong with me buying weapons? I feel threatened. They point at the neighbor, and of course the neighbor points back. They will also point at history and say, we are doing exactly what you were doing in the past, Europe, the West, when you felt threatened during the Cold War period. You acquired weapons because you felt threatened, so there is nothing wrong. For us, it's purely defensive. But of course, one's defense can be somebody else's offense.
Siemon Wezeman, this is your job, watching who sells weapons to who. When you see the news and you see what's going on, for instance, over in Crimea right now, and then you look at your little list and you see world's top exporter, United States, 29%, followed by Russia, 27%. Does that make you look cynically, I suppose, at current affairs?
It does make us cynical a bit, yes. And our purpose of this whole work is to make sure that discussions, that we encourage discussion, we try to feed discussions with facts so that it can be based on sort of rational background of facts that are known generally in open sources, but very few people in the public or even in parliaments or decision-making circles have a good overview of those facts because they only see bits and pieces.
In other words, the arms trade, the arms industry is something, I guess, almost it seems outside of the law when you scratch the veneer.
Well, it's definitely outside of the radar screen of many people. Many people see bits and pieces of it. There's a lot of media attention to the arms industry, to arms sales, compared to, for example, sales of cars or sales of vegetables, which in value are probably much more for many countries. But when you dig a bit deeper, many countries don't, many people in many countries, parliamentarians, decision makers, don't really have a good understanding of what's going on and why it's going on. Often also because the governments that buy and sell weapons keep the information on the why and especially on what in rather limited circles as generally secret or confidential.
So it's easy for them to pull a fast one on lawmakers, is what you're saying?
Yes, it is actually. You won't expect super discussions in Parliament if you don't give Parliament the proper information to base that discussion up.
Now, the recent announcement of a cut in the U.S. defense budget, it follows cuts we've seen here in France. What does it all mean for the arms industry?
Well, it's in a way it's very simple. The European market, the U.S. market, is becoming less big. So the local industries, and remember, most of the European countries and the US have quite substantial arms industries. They will have to look somewhere else, export. And in that, they are generally quite supported by their own governments who will help them marketing, help them sell, help them in finding buyers and actually making it easier to export, making it easier to get an export license.
And less discerning as to who they sell to?
Exactly. They will take more into account the fact that jobs are at stake than, for example, human rights situation in a recipient country or tensions in a region where the weapons are going to.
All right, chilling thought. Siemon Wezeman, many thanks for joining us there from Stockholm, from the International Peace Research Institute. Stay with us, much more to come here on France 24. More news, and then we'll have all the day's business and sports.